What is a Protestant? A Protestant is someone who used to, not anymore, this is all taken over by high-level Shriner Freemasonry. I don't know of a Protestant church I'd want to go to. But a Protestant used to be someone who protested the papal power and who believed the Bible to be the final authority of faith and practice.
Speaking down in Texas, in South Texas, where in a large church, the Masons who were in the church, many of them on the elder board, saw my tape Sunday morning when I was speaking there, and they said, you know, why are we allowing this man into our church? He's criticizing Freemasonry. And most of the elder board were Masons. The Sunday school teachers were Masons. In fact, one of the elders was the worshipful master of the lodge in town. Another one was the supreme potentate of the shrine. And they came to me after the service, and I said, well, you have the books. I said, look up in your own books, in context, what I say. I gave the chapters of the page numbers. They spent till 4 in the morning Sunday night going through all the documentation in their own Masonic library. They came back Monday and they said, we want you to know, Ron, we all resigned from the lodge last night. And we are seeing this happen all across the country as Masons will peel away the outer wrapping of the package and examine the content of what they're in. They will discover that they are in a non-Christian, pagan, idolatrous cult, and no Christian has any part in it.
In order to get into that, though, there was something very important I had to do. I had to become a Freemason, because you can't get involved in Satanism on the hardcore level without first being a Freemason. And so I found someone, I was sponsored into the Masons, and I became a first, second, third degree Mason. I went through the York Rite, I went through the Shrine. In fact, this is my little shrine portrait here. As you can see, by this time, I'd kind of shed some of my hippie appearance. I just shudder every time I see that thing. But this is just kind of by way of documentation that I really was involved in these things. That was my official shrine portrait, which they took as part of my initiation.
Hello and welcome, everybody. Today we are on September 8th, 2019 on a Sunday, here with Michael and Jörg Lissman, and we're going to delve into the 12th chapter of the book, The Great Exodus, or The Time of the End. And yesterday we had quite a doozy of a reading, and wow, I'm still just stunned by that one. Here we're looking at chapter 12, which is Vision of Cleansing, or the second chronological line, which is very interesting because we were doing some readings in this book, The Divine Program of the World's History. And I'm so thankful that we got that book scanned and put up on the internet for everyone to have. And with Michael and Jörg, where discussions and reading of that book is going to help us in kind of getting a grasp on what James Aiken Wylie is actually talking about here, because it's kind of, what should we say? It's more learned in the Bible, and especially in Protestant learning. And that's something that's been eradicated here for quite a while. And it's been kind of a struggle just to get that information a little bit proper, you know, get it straight, get it thoroughly understood in the head. Sometimes it's a little difficult, I must admit, but I'm just really thankful to have Michael and Jörg with me. So Michael, welcome to the broadcast.
Yeah, hi Brad, thanks for having me. And I'm also looking forward to another broadcast. And of course, I'm looking forward to more knowledge, because I think that these little books are very profound in their knowledge. Because I think that the ancient writers, they were much more careful than nowadays, because they were not so much distracted from television and modern media. So they had were very much concentrated and focused on their thing. And that's, I think that's the most profound thing I get out of these books, that they are so in-depth, that they are so detailed. And so I'm very much looking forward. And let's get on it.
Yeah, I also very much appreciate the way these authors write. This is a way that we are not used to have books anymore in the time that we live in today. And I think the more that I read of this book, The Great Exodus, the more I understand why it is so hidden in this world, why nobody knows this book. I mean, I have never ever anybody heard talking about this book. I hear many people speak about James Atkin Wylie, you know, many people in the quote-unquote community, but never ever anyone mentions this book, The Great Exodus. And this deals mainly in the first place with the captivity of the church, and that is what we were dealing with in the beginning of this book reading. And now we are still coming to the close of the end of the captivity, and when is the Great Exodus going to be, and where in the Bible is that foretold? And we are dealing, I think, with the last chapter of this first part of the book before we enter into the next part of the book. And it is so interesting, I couldn't help but read a few pages in advance. And I don't want to deprive you of the wonderful experience of reading that book with us today. Well, if it opens, please, thank you. Some technical issues here. Yeah, I have a few PDFs open because I have to do some other readings today, later on today. So I think this chapter 12, let me just check in the beginning of the book, is the end of this first part, that is the bondage. Yeah? No, it's not. There are still a few chapters to come, chapter 13 and chapter 14, and then we go into part 2, the Exodus. So we are still in laying the groundstone of the whole book, the bondage. Yeah? That is the part that we are speaking in. And of course, in chapter 12, where we are right now, or what we are going to embark right now, that is already very fast or very deep into that understanding, because of course we have read 12 chapters before. And I must say, this book is not an easy read, certainly not for me. But I'm getting more and more used to it. I'm getting better and better in the book and in the understanding of the book, especially because we read this book, never to forget, Albert Close, The Divine Program of the World's History. That was a wonderful book to go into before continuing in the Exodus, because Albert Close already gave us a very interesting view of history and revelation, and where in history certain parts of Revelation are written, so that it is easier for us now to understand the bondage of the bondage of the church in this book of the Great Exodus. So I'm glad we did this, and if you don't know this book, well, look in the playlists of the Divine Program of the World's History on Brett's and my YouTube channels, and avail yourself to those readings, or download the book and read it for yourself. We did 62 recordings on that, and it is really a wonderful work that we did. Not because we did a wonderful work, because Albert Close did a wonderful work, and then we were blessed by the Holy Spirit to read and understand this book. And now, without any further ado, I want to really go into the Great Exodus of James Atkin Wylie, written in 1864. And chapter 12 is called, as Brett already said, Vision of Cleansing, or the Second Chronological Line. We have considered the epoch delivered over to the world power. Its beginning and its end, the morning and the evening of its day, are strongly and definitely marked. On the one side stands the great image, on the other rises the great white throne. The era between is a lengthened one. At least it seems long to the church, which is seen all throughout it a captive and a mourner. But to the world power it is an era of prosperity and glory. Satan hath said to it, all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them will I give thee, provided you consecrate yourself to my interests and lend your arms and your laws to the support of idolatry. Now, why did I put that in green color? Because this is an absolutely profound sentence. This is dealing with Matthew and Luke chapter 4. The temptation of Christ, if you can call it that, where the devil wanted to tempt our Lord Jesus Christ and said, if you bow down, I will give you all these kingdoms, because it is to me to give to whomever I want to. And Jesus eventually said, get thee behind me, Satan, it is written, thou shalt glorify the Father, thy Lord, the Father God in heaven only. Not with these exact words, but you can look that up. And this is exactly what James Atkin Wylie writes here. Satan hath said to it, to what? To the world, to the kingdoms of the world that we live in today, the Antichrist system, that we wake up in daily, again and again and again. He has said to it, all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them will I give thee. Who? Yeah. Man. I will give it to you, man, provided you consecrate yourself to my interests and lend your arms and your laws to the support of idolatry. All the laws that are in our countries are laws made to fit the support of idolatry, aren't they? Whether we are living in quote-unquote Protestant America or quote-unquote Protestant Germany, or wherever we are living in this world, all our laws are in support of idolatry. Maybe not that quote-unquote out in the open for everybody to see, maybe a little bit hidden here and there, but eventually all the nations fall down and worship the image, worship the idol, right? Exactly as in Daniel it is said in Daniel chapter 3, when Nebuchadnezzar raised up that golden statue and ordered everyone at the sound of the flute and other instruments to fall down and worship the image. That's exactly the world that we live in today. To the world power it is an era of prosperity, but to the church it is a time of bondage. We are captive, and the church is a mourner for what has been happened of it, because it has been taken captive by Satan. I mean, I could probably go on for another hour about the sentence, but maybe I want to give some edification to hear it from Michael and from Brett about what they have to say about this sentence, because this, to me, up to now, reading this book, is the most profound sentence in the book that I found so far. At least that's my opinion. What's yours, brothers?
I think that's a confirmation, yeah. I think it's as simple a confirmation. I cannot argue about it, actually.
Well, I didn't ask to argue. I asked to, maybe you can give me your point of view if you see it the same way that I see it, and the same way that James Atkin Wylie sees it. Because really, you, Michael, are the one who is a big proponent of Luke chapter 4.
Yeah.
You love to read that, you love to cite that.
Yeah.
And I think when as soon as you read this sentence, all the kingdom has said to it, all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them will I give thee. When you read this, Luke chapter 4 must pop up in your mind immediately, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's why I cannot argue. I can confirm it, because it's just the same thing that I'm always citing. You see that it's just so blatantly obvious that Satan has been given the power of this material world to prove mankind, if mankind will,
to test mankind. You say
to test mankind. If mankind is really in a spiritual way moving towards God or towards the material thing, which belongs to Satan. So the more you get into the material world and you like to hail all material things and cars and houses and jewelry and this and that, you're a victim of Satan, obviously.
How about Madonna singing "Material Girl"? Eh?
Yeah, and also she was equipped with diamonds. She was equipped with diamonds.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, she was in I think in purple or red and purple, the colors of sin, and she was equipped with diamonds. Definitely, she was looking like a Marilyn Monroe, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so the devil taking Jesus up into an high mountain, shewed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and said to him, all this power I will give thee, and the glory of them. So what's the glory? The glory is the things that the eyes can see and the eyes would like to have, and it's so pleasant for the eyes and all the material things, but the material things don't last. They will not last. And as far as I'm concerned, my body also won't last. And so it's all futile. It's all just like Kansas, like the group Kansas just sang, dust in the wind. It's just all dust in the wind. So the only thing you can say for the next life, for the eternal life, is your soul, which is not material. So I don't care about any materialistic things in this world because they don't last. And that's the point that Satan cannot argue against, because the only thing he can offer is material goods.
I also find it interesting, the last part of the sentence where it says, and lend your arms and your laws to the support of idolatry. Lend your arms, from that I understand your military. You know, the force, the physical force that you have, and the laws to the support of idolatry. So that means, like the Roman Catholic Church says, you know, convert or die. Whether you're with us and you worship Satan, or you're going to die. And when you're going to die, that is experiencing the arms, meaning the military or the physical force of the papacy, of the Antichrist, or you bow down to the laws and support idolatry, as Satan says here. I mean, this is such a profound sentence. Really, it's this to me is the sentence of the book, at least up to now, because we still have a few pages to go.
No doubt. The era between. Yeah, the era between is a lengthened one. At least it seems long to the church, which is seen all throughout it, a captive and mourner. Okay, so we're all just downtrodden. Well, why are we downtrodden? Because we're providing a consecration to the interests of Satan and his laws to the support of idolatry. I mean, is this the mark of the beast?
That's a good question.
I think it is. That's just my take on it, but that's what this couple sentences is alluding to me. This is like, okay, well, if you want to bow down and worship the image, then you're giving all of your power and you're giving your glory to Satan, who is ruling over this world with a rod of Roman iron.
Yeah, I think this the sentence reflects the suffering the church undergoes, because the church separates itself from the world. And the world lends its arms and laws to the papacy in support of idolatry.
I just need to make this comment. Yesterday, set the record straight. When we finished this talk on the Sabbath and these three different aspects of the Sabbath, you have the seventh day, then you have the sabbatical year, and then you have the Jubilee. And that cycle was eradicated how long ago? How long has it been since Israel, the tribes of Israel has had that? And what happened in Kings chapter 1, or was it 1 Samuel chapter 8?
Yeah,
Eric?
Samuel, yeah. When the Israelites,
give us a king to judge us.
Exactly, demanded to have a king like the nations do.
Yeah. So this is what we get.
Yeah.
This is what we get.
That's actually,
whether we want it or not, this is what we got.
That's actually part of. I mean, James Atkin Wylie don't goes into that scripture here, but that is already the beginning of sorrows for the church. You know,
it is
because they put themselves under the authority of a king, as the heathen do, instead of under the authority of God. As God said in that very same chapter, they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me. Me. I am the one who led them out of Egypt, out of bondage, and they have rejected me, and want a king over them like the nations do, like the pagans do, like the heathen do. That is already signs of the bondage to come, let's say it this way. And where did this bondage now really start, and where is it really going to end? Well, this is what we are going to determine by reading this chapter. So, I suggest we go on with it, but I just wanted to make very misunderstandably clear that this is such important sentence that we read here. Yeah? The era between is a lengthened one, and we are going to determine what that era is. That's what we're going to read in the next few pages. At least it seems long to the church, which is seen all throughout it, the captive and the mourner. But to the world power, in opposition to the church, to the world power it is an era of prosperity and glory. Satan hath said to it, all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them will I give thee, provided you consecrate yourself to my interests and lend your arms and your laws to the support of idolatry. The world power hath struck hands with the tempter. It hath made a covenant with death and with hell. How are we so easily saying this? They have sold their soul to the devil. Is it at agreement? And for 7 times it reigns in power and great glory. But at last its knell is sounded. Earthquake shakes the world, and despotic thrones and idolatrous systems come up for judgment. We see no literal throne in the sky, we discern the face of no personal judge, yet the world power is made to feel that the tribunal has been erected, and that seated thereon is the great judge. His voice is heard from amid the clouds and darkness that veil his throne, and his arm is seen in the great acts of judgment by which the thrones of the world power are cast down and their dominion taken away. That epoch, we have shown, began with the captivity of the 10 tribes and ended at the outbreak of the French Revolution. We now proceed to trace the convergence of all the chronological lines of prophecy on the era of 1792. There are 3, and only 3, great chronological lines in prophecy. Each one has a different starting point, but they all terminate together. Now that's interesting, right? Each one has a different starting point, but all terminate together. The first and longest line is the 7 times. We may term it the trunk line of prophecy. It runs on for 25 centuries and 20 years, and embraces the entire period of the domination of idolatry. The second longest line is the 2,300 years of the vision of cleansing. Now here it is going to become interesting, because we are dealing with the 2,300-day year prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 that the Seventh-day Adventists misuse for their purpose of 1844. And I guess we are going to learn again something else, as we learned with the book of Albert Close, The Divine Program of the World's History, where we mentioned that already before, where we learned about the Edict of Toleration from 1844 that led to the downfall of the Ottoman Empire between 1844 and 1919. And here we are going to learn another interpretation of that, and that makes it so interesting. There's not one right interpretation as long as we are in the flesh, just reading the book and aren't perfect as God is. But there are many interpretations of those, and it is on us to discern what is the one that makes the most sense. And the farther that we go into history, the the more interesting it's going to be to watch the one or the other line, to watch the one or the other term, and to see when did this start. Well, that's what the author says very clearly. They all have different starting points, but the end point is the same. So that means that the 7 times 2,520 years, the 2,300 times of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, and the 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,203 score day years, all end at the same moment. This is what the author says here. There are 3 and only 3 great chronological lines in prophecy. Each has a different starting point. So the 1260-day year prophecy of the reign of Antichrist, of course, has not the same beginning as has the 2520, but the ending point is the same. This is what the author tells us, and this is, wow, interesting. So the first and longest line is the 7 times. We may term it the trunk line of prophecy. It runs on for 25 centuries and 20 years and embraces the entire period of the domination of idolatry. Now the second largest line is the 2,300 years of the vision of cleansing. When will the how is it said there in Daniel 8:14? When will the be cleansed? What is the word that uses there?
Oh boy, let's look it up here.
Yeah, I have Daniel open here, but it's Daniel 8:14. So it says the sanctuary. That was the point. When will the sanctuary be cleansed? That is the question. Yeah. So this is what we are going to determine right here with this reading. The second longest line is the 2,300 years of the vision of cleansing, the cleansing of the sanctuary. And the third line is the times, and the dividing of time, or 42 months, or 1,203 score years of John, embracing the period of the reign of Antichrist. All these lines have, as we have just said, a common termination. A different beginning, but a common termination. And that termination marks the close of the reign of idolatry. While they are running on, the idolatrous world power is supreme and dominant. But when they terminate, his domination is taken away, but not as yet his existence. There's a big difference. His domination is taken away, but not yet his existence. We shall now show that they all terminate at one and the same time, the point of common termination or convergence being the French Revolution. We turn now to the 8th chapter of Daniel. In that chapter we have the record of a vision which Daniel saw in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. The vision is substantially the same with that of the image and of the 4 beasts, only it begins with the 2nd kingdom and gives great prominence to the 4th kingdom, presenting it under new aspects and modifications. Daniel's visions are all within the great historic line. They never once turn aside to notice any other confederacy, whether political or ecclesiastical, which lies off the great highway of prophecy. They steadfastly point and progressively tend towards the grand culmination of the world power in the papacy. The scene of the vision, which we purpose to explain no farther than is necessary for our immediate object, which is that of fixing the time of its beginning and of its end, is laid on the banks of the Wylie. Quote, "Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river, that is, on its western bank, a ram which had 2 horns." Unquote. It is necessary to premise that now, that is, at the time implied in the vision, the 1st kingdom, the head of gold, had passed away, and the 2nd had risen. The 2nd is the Medo-Persian monarchy, and its symbol is the ram, which Daniel beheld standing on the western bank of the Wylie. Let us mark the attitude and action of the ram when first seen by Daniel, for this is of importance towards the determination of the time of the opening of the vision. The ram is seen standing, that is, continuing or subsisting in his power. And he is seen immediately to push, that is, to make war, westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. The Medo-Persian Empire is seen at the opening of the vision prosperous and stable, carrying its arms and its victories in 3 several directions, and by its conquests gaining yet greater glory and power. So much the opening symbol makes manifest. Now we read on. The Medo-Persian power passes away, and the third monarchy, the Macedonian or Greek, stands up in its room. Quote, As I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west, on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. Unquote. Now what a graphic picture of the rapidity of the conquests of Alexander the Great, the founder of the Macedonian Empire, by saying the he-goat did not touch the ground. He smote the ram, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, as we read in Daniel chapter 8, verses 5 through 8. With unexampled suddenness had the Greek power risen to universal monarchy. But we read on again. The third kingdom passes away in its turn, and the fourth kingdom, the greatest of them all, makes its appearance upon the stage. But mark, the Roman kingdom is seen in this vision not in its pagan, but mainly in its papal form. The obvious design of the vision is to draw at full length what had scarce found a place in the vision of the image and of the 4 beasts. Great prominence, accordingly, is given to the papal horn as being the culminating form of the world power and emphatically the wilderness and sackcloth period of the Church. Let us run summarily over this passage and mark with that unerring precision and happy brevity every prominent feature in the character of Papal Rome is struck off. The description begins at verse 9. Quote, And out of one of them, the 4 notable horns of the Greek power, came forth a little horn. Unquote. Small at its beginning, the Roman power, as the prophecy indicates, speedily waxed exceeding great toward the south, which is Egypt, and toward the east, which is Asia Minor, and toward the pleasant land, which is Palestine. It was the conquest of Macedonia which enabled the Roman power to take its place as the 4th universal empire in the earth. The newly risen horn, quote, waxed great even to the host of heaven, unquote, the worshippers of the true God. Quote, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, unquote. The Romans signalized their conquests in Judea by a persecution and slaughter of some of the priests. And how soon and fearfully Papal Rome began to persecute, seducing or destroying the professors of the truth, we need not say. The horn proceeded to yet greater extremities. Quote, Yea, he magnified himself against the prince of the host, unquote, against Messiah the prince. Pagan Rome magnified herself against Christ when she crucified him, and Papal Rome magnified herself against Christ when the Pope set himself up in his room, claimed to be his vicar, and became the Antichrist, rising to a still higher pitch of blasphemy. The little horn took away the daily sacrifice. Now listen closely. The Romans took away the literal daily sacrifice, and Rome Papal took away the daily or continual sacrifice of Christ when she substituted the Mass in its stead and, by her arrogated power of offering sacrifice for the living and the dead, denied the one great propitiatory sacrifice of Christ. Now, this is so important, and there is no coincidence, and we just happened to talk about this yesterday in our Bible study, right? The
That's right.
propitiatory sacrifice that Christ gave us. And what did we do in our Bible study yesterday? We read 1 John chapter 4, verses 6 through 13. And there we read in verse 10, "Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins." And papal Rome denied the one great this is hard word for me, propitiatory sacrifice of Christ. Is that a coincidence that I yesterday read this difficult word in the King James in 1 John 4:10 and now today in the book of the Great Exodus? I don't think so. I think this is for the Holy Spirit to make a point and to once again manifest even more, even harder, that the papacy was and always will be the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. What do you guys think?
I agree. Absolutely right, Jörg.
This is just a wonderful read, and this is why I put 2 exclamation marks on the side of the text here. Really. If any sentence is more important than the one we just read 2 pages before, I think it is this one. The Romans took away the literal daily sacrifice. Now, that's what has been offered in the temple every day. And Rome papal took away the daily or continual sacrifice of Christ when she substituted the Mass in its stead. So the pagan Romans took away the daily sacrifice of the temple because they forbade it. And then papal Rome took away the continual sacrifice of Jesus Christ because Jesus Christ once and for all died on the cross, and he was the one sacrifice for always. And Rome, papal Rome, takes that away because they substituted that sacrifice of Jesus Christ in the Roman Catholic Mass and sacrificed Jesus all over again in the quote-unquote Jesus cookie, the host, the Eucharist, in the Mass with their devilish dogma of transubstantiation. There's no other words for me to express this, and I hope that I'm correct in my explanation about this. You have to understand that Rome killed the sacrifices twice. First the literal daily sacrifice, and then papal Rome took away the continual sacrifice of Christ when Rome, the Church of Rome, substituted the Mass in its stead, and by her arrogated power of offering sacrifice to the living and the dead, something that the Lord of Hosts would never do because the dead are dead and there are no sacrifices for them anyway, denied the one great propitiatory sacrifice of Christ. The little horn consummated its wickedness by casting down the place of his sanctuary. Yeah, this is quite interesting to read, especially when you go into Daniel chapter 9, where it says in verse 27, "And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." You have to read Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 through 27 in understanding of what the author writes here, and then you will get it absolutely that it was Jesus Christ who once and for all set that one sacrifice once and for all, and that Rome just continues to do so because Rome ignores the deeds of our Lord Jesus Christ. The little horn consummated its wickedness by casting down the place of his sanctuary. This Rome pagan did when she burned the temple. Now, we know that 70 AD they burned the temple, and probably about 1 million Jews have been killed by the conquest of Titus the son of the Roman Emperor Vespasian, if I'm not mistaken, in 70 AD, when they burned the temple, as Jesus Christ foretold that there will not be one stone left upon the other. So this Rome pagan did when she burned the temple, and this Rome papal did still more when she cast down the organization and government which Christ and his apostles had given to the Christian church, first by the heresies which she broached, and second by the persecuting violence with which she assailed all who continued to profess the truth.
Comment.
Please.
Oh, I was just thinking, Yerk, we were just talking about that portion of 1 Samuel chapter 8 when the kings were put over the tribes of Israel, and they were no longer allowed to let Christ lead. Well, the Romans are doing the same thing, are they not? Christ came to manifest himself as the Messiah, and everyone rejected him, of course, and it was all foretold that he would be rejected. But even so, Rome is just doing the same thing over again, or they did. So, yeah, I think it's really quite a beastly act. This brute beast taking and destroying Christ.
By not accepting his sacrifice, they are destroying him daily, again and again and again in the Mass, yeah.
Yeah, by doctrine, they've completely destroyed him.
By doctrine, by, tradition.
Yeah, tradition. By philosophy, by vain deceit.
By vain deceit, by the rights of men,
Yeah, by idolatry. That's right.
Exactly, and idolatry is what we are dealing with here, as it was said in the beginning of this chapter, right?
Very good, brother. Continue.
That's where it says that Satan gives the authority and the power to the one who bows his knee to his power, and therefore lends his arms and his laws to him, and therefore he will give that, and that's exactly what Rome does. Yeah. Now the passage presents a double portrait in one painting. It compendiously groups all the characteristics, traits of popery, and with a few touches brings out in prominent relief all the notable acts of its fearfully guilty career. The application of the prophecy of Antiochus Epiphanes is, in our view, manifestly out of the question, for it suggests a wider and long desolation than any which he inflicted. And moreover, the interpreting angel in Daniel chapter 8 verses 19 through 23 places the rise of the little horn when the transgressors are come to the full, that is, when the apostasy has culminated, and his persecution runs on till the end of the indignation, that is, till the justification of the sanctuary at the time of the end. We are aware that there are expositors of prophecy, Faber and Eliot amongst the numbers, who see in the little horn of this vision the symbol of Mohammedanism. We have carefully considered the grounds on which they rest their opinion, but, after the best consideration which we are able to give them, we are constrained to regard them as wholly insufficient to sustain that opinion. We can find none of the characteristic features of Mohammedanism in the little horn, save the one feature of the idolatress, as a far too general trait to found an identification upon. Whatever system it be that prophecy describes, it seizes upon the essential features of that system, on those features that are peculiar to it and to no other, and stamps the likeness of the system with an impress too sharp and truthful as to leave no possibility of mistaking it. But where are the essential features of the Mohammedan power in this vision? If it was meant that Mohammedanism should be seen in the little horn, then has prophecy in this instance forgotten its happy art, and failed to paint the very likeness of the system it was predicting. We are further to take into account the following very grave objections, namely, that the Mohammedan power followed the Macedonian kingdom at an interval of well nigh 800 years, that its rise was at Mecca, which is scarce included in any one of the 4 divisions of the Macedonian kingdom, that it was an invader from without rather than a horn rising from within, and that through Mohammedanism was a terror and a scourge. It was so not to the professors of the truth, but to the adherents of idolatry. The sanctuary of the Christian church had been profaned and desolated before it arose, and in no proper sense can it be said of Mohammedanism that it took away the daily sacrifice and cast down the place of the sanctuary. These were the doings not of the Mohammedan horn, but of the papal horn. Now I advise everybody to mark this in your book, and whenever you have a discussion with anyone who tells you the Antichrist is Islam, you read to him this little passage on page 174 and 175 of the book The Great Exodus, or The Time of the End, How Near Are We to It, from James Atkin Wylie, because I've never heard a more profound and biblically based explanation how Mohammedanism does not in any way, shape or form how do they say that?
Fit the characteristics.
Yeah, fit the characteristics of Antichrist. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Thanks, Brett, for coming in there. Yeah, sometimes I'm just looking for words. I'm short of words.
No problem. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
I'm on the tip of my chair, man.
So maybe I can read this again, because I think this is really important, and
please do.
Probably can make a little note here. Also, yeah, this is not straight, but you know, I don't have a straight hand. Anyway, well, that's better. Nice point here. Read it again. We are further to take into account the following very grave objections, very grave. Namely, that Mohammedan power followed the Macedonian kingdom at an interval of well nigh 800 years. So that's an empty space of 800 years. What are you going to do with that? The 2nd century before Christ until the 6th century after Christ. That its rise was at Mecca, which is scarce included in any one of the 4 divisions of the Macedonian kingdom. That it was an invader from without rather than a horn rising from within, and that though Mohammedanism was a terror and a scourge, it was so not to the professors of the truth, but to adherents of idolatry. The sanctuary of the Christian church had been profaned and desolated before it arose, and in no proper sense can it be said of Mohammedanism that it took away the daily sacrifice and cast down the place of the sanctuary. These were the doings not of Mohammedan horn, but of the papal horn. Now let's put this into...
comment. Yerk, wasn't there a portion of the book, The Divine Program of the World's History, where we were dealing with the horn that waxed exceedingly great in Daniel? I don't remember which chapter that was. The horn that waxed exceedingly great. I think it was talking of... I think it was talking about the papal horn rising above the Mohammedan. Am I confusing this with the Orthodox Church? I can't remember. Well, I'm sorry, I kind of lost it.
It is in any way, it is quite sure that what we are reading here about, that there is no way that the Mohammedan power can be a replacement of the papal power. So therefore, that the Mohammedan power cannot be the Antichrist, which can only be the papal horn. Also, of course, because when we do our true history studies, we understand that the papal horn was inventing the Mohammedan horn. It was just another arm, and Yeah. Let's leave it at this here for this moment, except of course for Michael when he has to say something on the discussion here.
No, he doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Daniel chapter 8, verse 9, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south and towards the east and towards the pleasant land. I think we already read that because we're dealing with Daniel 8, aren't we, in this chapter?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good.
The only objection of any apparent weight to this view of the matter is that the little horn is said to rise out of one of the four notable horns into which the Macedonian power was parted on the death of Alexander. But this will be felt to have but little weight when we reflect that, though the Romans came from Latium, they were, by common report, a Greek colony. If there is any doubt, says the Duke of Manchester, if there is any doubt as to whether the nation was a colony of the Greeks, this evidence would be sufficient to preponderate. And farther, it was by the conquest of Macedon, the cradle of the Greek kingdom, that the Romans served themselves heirs to the empire of the world and took their place as the fourth universal kingdom. Now, let us mark the unity this gives to Daniel's visions. Though communicated to him, quote, at sundry times and in diverse manners, unquote, they form a great whole. In his prophetic perspective is beheld only one system, and that system is seen growing ever stronger in its political organization and rising ever higher in its blasphemous development, till at last it culminates in a power that magnifies itself against the prince of the host, takes away the perpetual sacrifice, casts down the place of the sanctuary, and shows himself as God sitting in the temple of God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, this is by the way. Daniel had been shown an affecting vision of the sanctuary of Christendom defiled by a tyrannical and blasphemous power, and he was naturally desirous of knowing how long that defilement would continue. And a certain saint asked the wonderful numberer, how long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot, in verse 13 in chapter 8 of Daniel. The answer is given in the next verse, number 14, where it says, quote, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, which of course spoken prophetically are years, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed or justified, meaning the sentence delivering it over to desolation on account of transgression shall be lifted off, and the initiative taken in its cleansing. We are here distinctly told that it is the expiry of 2,300 years the sanctuary of the Western Christendom, defiled by the errors and desolated by the persecuting violence of the papacy, should begin to be cleansed. The great question here is, from what point are we to count these 2,300 years? Unquestionably, we are to count them from the opening of the vision. Now the question put is, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? And the answer returned is, the vision shall be until 2,300 days, or years. Now this turns us back to the beginning of the vision. The opening symbol of the vision is the ram, the Medo-Persian power, firmly established on the west of the Wylie, and beginning to wage war westward and northward and southward. What period in the history of the Medo-Persian kingdom synchronizes with the symbol? Not the rise of that kingdom under Cyrus, for in that case we should have been shown the ram rising. Not its decadence under Xerxes, for in that case we should have been shown the ram retreating, not pushing victoriously, so that no beasts might stand before him. Now we have examined the question very carefully, And we are fully satisfied that there is but one period in the Medo-Persian history that fulfills all the conditions of the symbol, and that is the reign of Darius Hystaspes. By the consent of historians, the Medo-Persian power reached its height under his monarchy. Darius Hystaspes rescued the empire from a weak prince of the name of Smerdis, and by his wisdom opened for it a new era of prosperity and glory. He was equally distinguished as a legislator and as a warrior. The internal arrangements of his 127 provinces he remodeled and perfected. The boundaries of his empire he extended far beyond the limits at which Cyrus and Cambyses had left them. Of Smerdis, the successor of Cambyses, and the immediate predecessor of Darius, we say nothing, for under him the empire had begun to decline, but the vigor of Darius brought new territories to the Persian monarchy and new luster to the Persian arms. And, what is much to our point, these acquisitions of territory were in the precise directions indicated in the prophecy, to the west, to the north, and to the south. Of the wars of Darius Hystaspes, Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus have left us a tolerably minute account. They inform us how this monarch, by the help of vast armies and powerful fleets, invaded Greece on the west, Scythia and Thrace on the north, and those parts of India lying towards the south of Persia. These are the precise directions in which the prophet saw the ram pushing: westward, northward, and southward. The pushing southward is the last to be indicated, and accordingly the expedition to India was subsequent to at least the initiative of his great northern and western expeditions. He fitted out a fleet on the Indus, which, descending that river, coasted along westward to the Red Sea and returned by Egypt. It is reasonable to suppose that the parts of India which Darius conquered were those which his exploring party had surveyed. Indeed, we know they lay along the Indus, and this lay southward of Persia. This expedition to India was undertaken in BC 508. A document of a remarkable kind, and one coeval. What is that word here? I don't understand. Can you explain this word to me, brother?
I can look it up. Yep, I'll look it up while you're...
A document of a remarkable kind, and one coeval with Darius himself, so probably in agreement, has just the other day been brought to light. This document throws fresh interest and intelligence upon the prophecy we are considering. We refer to the graven rock at Behistun. That rock remained unread for ages, an idle wonder, and it seemed, for little did man dream what record it bore, till the other year that Mr. Rawlinson deciphered it, and found it to be a history of the wars of Darius, graven by the order of Darius himself. From that record it appears that Darius Hystaspes fought 19 battles, conquered 9 kings, and compelled their nations to submission to his yoke. What a picture of the pushings of the ram westward, northward, and southward, and victorious on all sides, so that no beasts might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. This record Providence has preserved to our day, as if to authenticate his own prophecy and to lead us with his own finger to the right interpretation of it. In a footnote we read that the inscription is a trilingual one, so it means 3 different languages. The reader may see it in full in Rawlinson's Herodotus, Volume 2. The more material portions are given in Dr. Keyes and his History of the Destiny of the World and the Church, and there is no mention of India in the Behistum tablet, but it occurs on the platform at Persepolis. The author continues to tell us, as if still farther to indicate the connection of Darius Hystaspes with the vision of cleansing, the literal temple at Jerusalem was in his reign reconsecrated. It was this king of Persia who granted the Jews permission to resume the building stopped by the opposition of the Samaritans, and in AD 516 the temple was finished and solemnly dedicated. Now, let us come to the conclusion which all these facts enable us to draw. In the foreground of the vision stands conspicuously the ram, pushing victoriously towards the west, and towards the north, and towards the south. Historically, a faithful reflection of prophecy, God having taken care that whatever is prominent in the one should be equally prominent in the other. Whether it be the pages of Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, or the graven rock at Behistum, silent so long, silent no longer, it is the ram that is seen pushing victoriously at this era, just as the prophet saw him. 1 year is specially noted by historians as the year when all these great expeditions, which lasted till the very close of this reign, were fairly initiated, and that is the year 508 BC. If, from the year 508 BC, we count the 2,300 years of the vision, we are brought down to the year 1792, as the year when the sanctuary should be justified and the initiative taken in its cleansing. But this, we have already shown, is the year when the 7 times run out and the judgment sits. In another footnote we read here, for the facts of which the conclusions of this chapter are founded, the author has consulted Wilkins's Herodotus, volumes 2 and 3, Diodorus Siculus Prideaux, volume 1, Rollin, book 6, chapter 1 through 8, Tytler's Elements of Ancient History, and Fraser's History of Persia, and so on and so on. So also here we are told that this book is very well documented. Now, did the sanctuary then begin to be cleansed? In 1792 we find, amid social convulsions and political terrors, a double process of cleansing beginning in the Western Christendom. A storm gathers suddenly over the era of the Fourth Kingdom. It bursts in unexampled fury, but mark where its violence falls. It falls on the very dynasties and hierarchies which had persecuted the saints. The despotic thrones and idolatrous altars of the papal world were shaken by the earthquake and shivered by the lightnings of that storm, preparatory to their being swept altogether out of existence. The sentence of desolation was lifted off from the church and laid upon the world power. The desolating agent began itself to be made desolate. Contemporaneously with this process of destruction, we can trace a process of re-edification. At this era were founded those great evangelistic institutions in Britain and in America, which have ever since been carrying the Bible and the Gospel to every accessible part of the continent of Europe and to the world. The same hour that saw the armies of the Revolution go forth to inflict upon the papal nations the ravages of war, saw also the first missionaries go forth to preach the gospel of peace to the nations. I think I remember that was about the time that we speak here. That was the time of the beginning of the Bible. What is it called? Bible societies, right? That was
Sounds
the beginning
good.
of the 19th century. I think that was
Right. Mm-hmm.
what we learned in Albert Close's book. The same wild winds that swept away the abominations of Christendom made a way for the light to shine again into that sanctuary, which popish error and terror, by the way, had so long darkened, and popish violence had trampled underfoot. Thus, amid the dark clouds of judgment and a spiritual temple was seen to rise, beauteous and fair, upon the old foundations. Quote, "They shall build the old wastes. They shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations." Unquote. And this is the end of chapter 12. I'm glad we got through it, but I have a little suspicion that we will be in need of rereading a part of this maybe next time, after reading this a first time, maybe a second time, to get a better understanding of this very important part of the chapter that we just wrote in this book. I, for my part, will give it to my brothers Michael and Brett to close the broadcast and see if next time maybe we are going to get back into this, because I think this is just
one quick comment before you get to this.
You can comment directly. The point is that I think that some things you have to read twice for a real good understanding, and I don't think that we got the full understanding of it with this first unprepared reading. Neither me nor my brothers who are with me in this reading here. So therefore I suggest that we probably take some time studying this before we do our next broadcast, because this book of James Atkin Wylie really is deep into the subject, I can tell you that. And I don't want to lose anything, because I don't want to run over things, and I think we have to study this a little bit deeper. But now I will leave it to my brothers Michael and Brett for their last comment, please.
Oh, I just wanted to quick say that word Coeval, Coeval, and page 180 on the, what is it, the second paragraph there, a document of a remarkable kind, one Coeval with Darius himself. Coeval means of the same age.
Oh, of the same age.
Yeah, so that's really that's an interesting term. That's what I just love about these old book readings, is we're uncovering some of these old words that have been lost,
on what
not
page?
used anymore. Page 180, I believe it is, of the book. 178 of the book. I'm sorry, page 178. The bottom, second paragraph.
Yeah, I thought it was more in the beginning of the page. Yeah.
You see it?
No.
Oh, you're not in the PDF, but of the 178. You're one page back. There you go, right there. Is it the third paragraph?
Yeah.
See it there? Right.
Here it is. Coeval. So what does it mean?
It means of the same age.
So a document of a remarkable kind, and one Coeval with Darius himself, has just the other day been brought to light. So of the same age, as old as the one of Darius himself. Yeah. Okay, that gives an understanding to that. Good. Then I'll leave it up to you two for some closing remarks.
Michael, should I go ahead, or do you want to go first?
I'm just on one short comment, because I'm really thinking about the term with the Mohammedism. So I think that the sentence that Jörg has read, that it's all about the papal homes and not of the Islamic people. It's just that's also another hint that the Islam is the patsy for the actions which are in charge of the Roman Catholic Church. And it's so blatant obvious that every time they blame another, or they put the blame on another to put away, or put them out of the spotlight. And so it's just that, and the entire time that Jörg was reading, my mind was constantly focusing on that point, that every time something very important arrived, something very important was happening in the world, there was a patsy. It was in the First World War, it was in the Second World War, it was the JFK, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that now in our days, the Islam is the patsy for the great, big New World Order, so that they can name everybody a terrorist and so on and so on. And you see that keeping in charge, that there was another video from a university, I think, where a highly decorated Marine general, Georgetown University, was speaking that fundamentalists are a threat and have to be eliminated. And he was not only speaking of Muslim, but also of Jewish and Christian fundamentalists. Yeah, and that kept me busy during the reading this time. And that's
that is in the video Georgetown University, the Devil's Playground on Hour of the Truth. There you will find that one.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, it's really, boy, I mean, this book, along with the other one we just finished, the Divine Program of the World's History, I just can't help but think of, the storm that we were reading about just now in page 180 here of this book. So page 180, the bottom paragraph reads, "Did the sanctuary begin to be cleansed? In 1792, we find amid social convulsions and political terrors, a double process of cleansing, a double process of cleansing in the Western Christendom." So to me, this just rings a serious bell back to the book, The Divine Program of the World's History, where in one of the pages there, I don't have that book in front of me, it's out in my truck right now, it speaks of France being the storm center of Europe. I put that as a title to one of our videos. And it makes a lot of sense to me. So, yeah, wonderful reading, Jörg. Thank you very much. And thank you, Michael, for joining us. And really looking forward to digging back into this chapter and going through it again. So, with that, I guess that wraps it up. And we'll catch up with everyone next time. God bless and bye-bye.
What made one think that the lodge was a Christian place was the fact that I found people who were members of the same church to which I belong, the Presbyterian Church in Canada, were members of the lodge, members in prominent positions in the lodge. And the fact that these members in their rituals used quotations from Scripture sort of doubly made one think that it was okay.
Speaking to the head potentate of the shrine in Minneapolis, where I'm from, he called me up one day and he had heard my tape on Masonry. He says, "How dare you say that Masonry is not Christian?" He says, "I'm a deacon in my church. I teach Sunday school in my church." He says, "I'm a good Christian." He says, "And I'm the head of the shrine. How can you say I'm not a Christian?"
Masons love to infiltrate organizations. I mean, they've infiltrated the major religions in this country, to where we went to a church in Upperville, Virginia for a while, and after the pastor learned that I was doing this book, he came out and said, "Yeah, I was a Mason." And I came out, I started speaking out against it from the pulpit, and my career plummeted from that point. So he was at this little backwater Baptist church in Upperville, and he said that 90% of the Southern Baptist hierarchy are Masons, and that if you wish to excel in the Southern Baptist ministry, you have to be a Mason. He said the same was true of, I believe, both Lutherans and Methodists, that he estimated that it was 90% Masonically infiltrated at that point.
Now that's the key point to the conspiracy, because if any of you have made bread, how much leaven, which is just yeast, does it take to make bread? Not very much, just a little bit. I mean, if you put too much in, you're going to have something that looks like the monster that devoured Cleveland sitting there on your countertop. You just take a little bit, and then you work the dough, and what happens? The leaven disappears. It just sort of blends into the dough, and you can't even tell where it went. But it starts percolating through the entire mass of dough until all of a sudden you've got the whole thing leavened. And that's how this works in the church. That's how the conspiracy works in society in general. If you've got one Mason in your congregation, and especially if he's like a deacon or somewhere else in leadership, you're going to end up with a kind of one bad apple spoiling the whole barrel routine. That's percolating down, and you're going to have all sorts of issues within your local body. Similarly, if you have a Mason in your family, his spiritual authority is going to percolate down and leaven the lives of the wife, of the children, of the grandchildren, of the great-grandchildren, down 3 or 4 generations, and that's a curse that needs to be broken. Leaven, like yeast, is a living organism which is capable of reproducing itself, and that's what happens. You never just have one of these dudes in a church. They always start recruiting, because Masons are like homosexuals. They can't reproduce themselves naturally. They can only, yeah, amen, they can only recruit. You know, think of that. That's the way with every cult. See, we are born again.
At times, our efforts and works seem to fail and not produce fruit. We need to remember that we are followers of Jesus Christ. And his life, humanly speaking, ended in failure, the failure of the cross.
This means that we must be especially attentive to every type of fundamentalism, whether religious or of any other kind. A delicate balance is required to combat violence perpetrated in the name of a religion, an ideology, or an economic system. There is another temptation which we must especially guard against. The simplistic reductionism which sees only good or evil, or if you will, the righteous and sinners.